kid would do when you want to play video games. So you hop downstairs, you slip on your VR headset, and you shoot bad guys. And you see these little space-like invaders in your screen, and you target them and you shoot them. And before long, you have eradicated all the bad guys, and you have won the game. And in fact, what you've been doing, you've been winning a video game, but you've also been eradicating someone's brain tumor. So this is a very hypothetical scenario. It's a 10-year outlook. It used to be a 20, 30-year outlook, but with the rate of change of technology, it's now a 10-year outlook. So today we're going to talk about technology and the future of medicine. So you won this game. Won the game called The Tumornator. So today we're going to talk about how do we engineer the tomorrow we want to see. What kind of technologies are fueling medicine? What are the perils and pitfalls? What are the frameworks that we're working within? So the objectives of today are to understand the emerging trends and technologies that will impact innovation in medicine, to introduce you to our greatest challenges in medicine and society, and to develop a mindset towards thinking in exponentially and an innovation mindset, and then also to just indulge in some personal reflection as to how this applies to you within your own context and your own role in medical innovation. So by the end of this, I want you to be able to answer 3 questions. First of all, what is innovation? Second of all, why does it matter? And then finally, how do we innovate? Okay, so this is a thought experiment. What is this object? It's not a trick question.
Like a pop bottle.
Exactly. Okay, what do we use a pop bottle for?
Drinking pop, pouring it out.
Exactly. Okay, so then our first thought experiment is, well, what else can we use it for? What are other purposes for a pop bottle?
You could store things in pop.
Sure. What can you store in it?
First thing that came to my mind is like coins, if you want to
Like a piggy bank,
like,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay, what else can you use it for? All right, so no worries. Okay, so here's some of the creative uses people use bottles for. They've used them for planters, chandeliers, bird feeders, jewelry storing containers, pencil cases, even more chandeliers, and as you said, a piggy bank. So this is what we're going to talk about today, is learning to think differently and how we can apply existing concepts as well as new concepts and do so towards some medicine. So here's another example of the bottle reimagined. So this is the Heinz 57 tomato ketchup, famous for being stuck in the bottle. So a group of innovators at MIT Media Lab said, well, what if we just made a better bottle? What if we didn't have to waste 1% or 2% of the product every time we threw away a ketchup bottle? Because if you add that up over billions of bottles in many landfills, that actually ends up to a lot of product. So this is what they did. Let's see if this will play for us. Okay, perfect. So here you have the typical Heinz ketchup bottle. Due to the adhesive properties of both the ketchup and the bottle, you can see how the ketchup sticks to the inside of the bottle. So what if we just re-engineered that and made the cohesive properties of ketchup stronger than to the force of attraction to the bottle, and voila, all of a sudden we can access the full amount of product. So this is just one example of thinking differently. Okay, so I'm going to go back. I think I'm right here. Yes, okay, so we're going to go back into full screen. I'm going to go back to where we were first of all. So this is where I come back to the introduction part of the class. Okay, so I want to know more about you and your background, so I can introduce myself. So my name is Dr. Shawna Pandya. I am a physician. I am a clinical lecturer with the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. I'm an explorer, and I do research in space and extreme environments. So I've tested spacesuits through my other role with the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences. I've been an aquanaut on a scientific mission. and tested all manner of spacesuits in zero-G, water environments, and partial gravity environments. So my official affiliations are as a physician, as I've said, as the director of the IIAS Space Medicine Group, the instructor of the IIAS Space Medicine course. One of my commercial interests is I work with Luxonic Technologies, which is a Canadian company that leverages virtual reality, immersive technologies, 360 video, mixed reality for medical applications. We're going to learn more about that in the VR and AR lecture. And I'm a medical advisor to several commercial space companies, including Above Space, Astrius, and a whole host of other positions as well. So that's me. Over to you. What's your name? What are you studying? What brought you to this course? And what do you hope to get out of this course?
Well, my name is LABMP, Guitar is my last name, and I'm a first year neuroscience student, and my older sister actually took this course, and I knew a little bit about it, but when I was asking her like more details, I learned that it was about like technology and like the future of medicine and how can we like improve medicine. And I thought that was really cool because like I first learned about like cool technologies like CRISPR was like the first thing I learned, and like how you can like snip out DNA, and that really interested me. So I'm excited to learn more about the technology and how we can, you know, use it to like improve medicine, improve people's lives. And yeah.
Perfect. And can you repeat your part about the connection to the class? I just missed it.
Connection to the class?
Yeah, sorry, you said you had a friend or something who took.
Yeah, my older sister took this
Okay,
course.
so awesome. Who was your sister?
Her name is Emily.
Emily. When did you take the class? Do you remember, Kim?
2 years ago?
Okay,
3 years
I
ago?
probably taught her too. Cool. Tell her I say hi. And fun fact, I also took neuroscience at U of A back in the day, so
Wow.
there is a connection there. Okay. All right, so that was your part to introduce yourself. Okay, so let's get to the questions we hoped to answer today. So first of all, what is innovation? So innovation can be taking existing principles and building upon them. So this is dating myself, not even a little bit anymore, quite a lot. But it can be building a better operating system. So we once had people line up at midnight around the corner to get the next copy of Windows 95 and install it on a CD-ROM on their computer. And then it should be Windows 11, Windows 12 now, I think. So then the latest, we've upgraded and built an operating system since. It can be hardware, so we have very dated pictures of smartphones and tablets now. Just to show you how long I've been teaching this class. It can be taking sci-fi concepts and making them reality. So the flying car has long been an example of innovation in this class. So this stems back to maybe the first year I was teaching this class, maybe 2012. So this is a concept for a flying car. I think it actually plays, maybe not. What's happening here? I think that's supposed to be a video for a flying car. Maybe not. Okay. Well, it's not showing up for whatever reason. Maybe. Oh, there it is. Okay. So in the past 2 years, a company out of Slovakia came up with a concept for a hybrid car that can also be a flying car. So people have built on this concept. And then at CES, the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas this past month, companies like Hyundai and emerging companies have built on concepts for not just flying cars, but electric flying cars. Also AI-enabled cars, and cars that can rotate their wheels 90 degrees to parallel park. So those are examples of innovation. It can also be emerging technologies, so it can be drones, so drone delivery for food delivery, for fun, for photography, for package delivery, like with Amazon. So then we need to start asking, well, what can drones do in medication and medicine delivery? It can be bringing technology to existing objects. So here's a concept for smart technology. Welcome, come have a seat. It can be concepts for smart technology. So this is from, I think, one of the Stanford design programs. Basically, it's a concept for a smart ottoman that decides that you need to put your feet up and make you more comfortable, whether you want it or not. So it can also be using emerging technologies for a multitude of purposes. So 3D printing for art. I really like this installation because it's a very unique story behind it. So what they did is they took someone's sneeze and then they computer modeled it to see what that would look like, and then they inputted that into a 3D printer, and then they created a vase. So they took someone's boogers and made them art. So art. So this is an example of thinking innovatively. 3D printing for food, so you can have your face and eat it too. 3D printing for tissues. So think about the implications of that. 3D printing, if we were able to print organs that are an exact donor match, then suddenly we can shorten the immense amount of waiting lists for organ recipients, as well as reduce the risk for rejection. 3D printing for space. So Made in Space was the first company to bring 3D printing to space in 2010. They printed off tools on the International Space Station, and since then, in the past 4 months alone, maybe 6 months now, there have been examples of printing heart cells and knee meniscus cells up in space. And then 3D printing for conservation. So here is a turtle with pyramidalism. So they're missing the top part of their shell, so they were able to get a bioprosthesis in the form of a 3D printed shell and able to go live their best turtle lives. Okay, so other examples of innovation, not quite medical, but thinking of reimagining materials science. So oil spills can be massive environmental disasters, and cleanup is not an insignificant task. It requires cleaning up the oil spill so it doesn't affect marine life, it doesn't affect the local flora. And so here's an example of a novel technology that is lightweight, highly absorbable, and reusable. I'm just going to play this video. Just another example of innovation. Before we go on much further, we just did introductions, you just missed them. So hi, I'm Dr. Shawna Pandya, I'm a physician, I'm an explorer, and I am an extreme environment researcher. I've been teaching this class for, 13 years now.
Yep.
Makes me feel old to say that. So just would like to know your name, what you're studying, what brought you here, and what you hope to get out of this course.
Sure, thank you. Sorry I was late first off.
That's okay, the roads are a mess.
And my name is Miriam Al-Azeri. I'm a third-year science student doing a bachelor in science, specialization in psychology.
Okay.
I am interested in the medical field, which is what brought me here, and I was looking for, an extra class for my schedule. And I think it's a really interesting conversation, like a combination of technological innovation and then health and how we can improve it. And it's a conversation actually we have in our household a lot, because I come from a medical background and my brother's in computer science, so this is always, it's like a dinner time conversation, so I love that I get to study it.
Cool. Tell them to come to this course. Okay, so basically, we went over the objectives at the beginning, but the 3 questions we want to answer today is, what is innovation? Why does it matter? And then how does one innovate? And my hope is that you will get a sense of all of those questions, particularly as they apply to the medical field. And then also the 4th objective is just to think of your own role within medical innovation and how your background would position you to contribute to medical innovation. Okay, so, sorry, gory pictures in this presentation, by the way. It can also be thinking of doing known procedures differently. So this is an example of a Chinese factory worker who lost his hand in an industrial accident, but the hand was still found to be viable. So while the stump of his hand healed and was made appropriate for retransplantation, they kept the hand alive by just grafting it onto the leg to keep it alive and have some blood supply. And that was totally novel at the time when it was done in 2015. Okay. We have seen, so the cool part about teaching this course through the years is I get to keep updating it with new advances in technology and medicine. So in the past 2 years, the first pig to human heart transplant was conducted. The donor did die, I believe, unfortunately. I think it was more of issue with compliance to anti-rejection medications. But again, speaking to this idea of challenges within medicine, donor availability for organ recipients is a huge bottleneck and is a massive problem to be addressed. So 3D printing is one way of addressing that shortage, but also xenotransplantation is another example. Okay, looking at new technologies, new industries, again, not yet talking about medicine, but human spaceflight is changing dramatically. So since 2021, we've seen the rise of commercial spaceflight. We have seen suborbital companies like Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, and companies like SpaceX take civilians, astronauts who are not trained through any space agency like NASA or the Canadian Space Agency, and have the opportunity to go to space. So it is a really interesting time, probably the best time to be alive. So then what is next on the horizon? In the past 2 years or so, it's been the idea of metaverse, it's been the idea of creating an adjacent virtual world and congregating within it, and also using those applications for everything from business to conferencing to surgical planning. We're also living in an era of changing currencies and using new technologies such as blockchain to create more secure, unique to the user ways of dealing with money, which has pros and cons. As if anyone you know follows Bitcoin fervently, you will know all about that. Okay, so this is just to give you an idea of what the world is like and how rapidly it's changing. Okay, so now let's bring this discussion back to medicine, because this is a technology of the future medicine class. So what operating frameworks do we use to go about our daily lives as physicians and in medicine? Okay, so let's strip away all the technology, all the talk about innovation now, and let's talk about how we practice ethically as physicians. Okay, so the World Health Organization, the WHO definition of health, is not merely the absence of disease, but the presence of psychological, spiritual, and social well-being. So that I first heard this in second year medical school, it kind of blew my mind, because it's not simply not being diseased, but it's also progressing towards holistic wellness. So that's one framework. Okay, the National Institute of Health in the States goes by the 5P. There's also a bonus 6P model. So predictive, personalized, precise, preventative, participatory, point of care medicine. So medicine that can predict what a disease course will do earlier in the course of that disease. One that is contextualized towards a patient's particular background and experiences, that is more precise with diagnostics, that is more specific and more sensitive, and has less of a false positive and false negative detection rate, that is more preventative, because as we'll see, one of the major challenges in healthcare in Canada is the burden of chronic disease. So if we can prevent people from getting heart disease, diabetes, high blood pressure, that will not only save individual patients a lot of challenges with their own health, it'll also save the system a lot of money. Participatory, making patients feel like that they're part of the solution towards their own health. And then point of care, enabling physicians outside of a major hospital, a major tertiary care center, to be able to provide the same standard of care. I know this because I live this every single weekend and holiday when I'm in a rural community, wishing I had a CT scanner or an ultrasound or the same lab capabilities as the hospital across the street does. Okay. When we talk about how we operate as physicians in Canada, we talk about the CanMeds competencies. So these, what does it take to make a medical expert? So we talk about being a scholar, someone who can keep up with the medical literature and clinical practice guidelines. Being a professional, so the exact opposite of what House MD would do towards his patients. Being able to communicate both at an academic level with a fellow physician, but also being able to break that down in a way that's relatable to patients. Being collaborative, working with other disciplines and also researchers to help advance the field of medicine and do what's in the best interest of the patient. Being a leader as well as an advocate for both positive change in healthcare as well as for the patient's best interests. Tied to that, we'll come back to this one. Tied to that are the principles of medical ethics. So first principle is do no harm. So that's non-maleficence, then acting the best interest of your patient, beneficence, acting within the patient's decision-making rights, so patient autonomy, and doing what is fair for the patient, so that's justice, okay? So then also, again, this is a lot of information, but it's just to kind of tell you how we think about and approach healthcare globally and then specifically within Canada. So within Canada, we are so far a public healthcare system, and we believe in our healthcare system is based on foundations of public administration, being accessible no matter where you go, being universal and portable. So even if I have to end up in an emergency room in, say, Newfoundland, my Alberta healthcare coverage carries over there and vice versa. And then being comprehensive. So, you know, it's being able to care for a patient throughout their lifespan, and then also based on whatever disease they may encounter, whether it's cardiovascular or neurological or anywhere in between, okay? So then let's take into, now let's start bringing in the technology and emerging concepts to tie in. So the World Economic Forum came up with its list of emerging technologies and principles to start helping support these definitions of health. So smart care, care anywhere, empowered care, and intelligent health enterprises. So what does that mean? Leveraging technologies to be able to do detection earlier, being able to make that healthcare portable and universal and accessible, making it participatory and empowered by having the patient play more of a role in it, and then also using emerging technologies like big data, artificial intelligence, large data sets to make better predictions and more specific tailored medicine. Okay. So those are all the frameworks, okay? Just to let you know that there's a lot out there. I don't expect you to memorize this. Okay, so now let's talk about what are our greatest challenges and problem spaces in medicine right now. So this is, I'm just gonna turn it over to the class for a second. Like, you have been a patient in your life at some point, whether it was a sore throat, whether it was a sprained ankle, whether it's just watching the news these days. What are challenges in medicine that you see as an observer or as someone who's interested in medicine, and then what are opportunities? Miriam, we'll start with you.
I think the biggest so I've just recently moved to Canada, so for me navigating actually the healthcare system in Canada was quite difficult when I first came.
Okay.
How you have like a family doctor has to refer you to if you need something.
Yeah.
And I've heard like from the people around me like being on a waiting list for so long for like a specific treatment.
Where did you move from?
Issue. Well, I grew up in the UK,
okay.
So and it just operates kind of similarly to
Very
here.
similarly, yeah.
Yeah, and then I moved to Kuwait when I was 13, 14, which is kind of a mix of everything. They do have public health care, but they also have the private sector.
Okay.
So you can do, I mean, the UK is the same, you do have private and
yeah.
public, but
yeah.
It was the first time where I heard you had to get a referral to see another doctor, like you couldn't just go to the specialist that you need. So I feel like that kind of contributes to, I don't know how it works exactly, but contributes to the waiting issues. So I think probably the biggest problem spaces would be organizing, I'm sure it's a much bigger issue, but organizing waiting times. So with AI, if we could automate that system, maybe it would, reduce manpower and allow it to run more smoothly.
Okay, cool analysis. My dad actually used to work as a physiotherapist in Kuwait back many decades ago. Okay, cool. And sorry, I forgot your name already. Eliane. Okay, perfect. Go ahead.
Well, not specifically in Canada, but like in the U.S. because their healthcare is private. Like seeing a lot of patients not being able to like get the treatment they need to survive because of like insurance and like that. It's just so devastating. I don't know.
It's very devastating. Yeah.
And then in Canada, the waiting times, like, yes, it is public, but you're waiting in a waiting line of like 50 people, and it's like years and years to get the treatment that you need. And so, yeah, those are the problems that I see in healthcare. Also, there's like mistreatment of patients. Usually people of color getting mistreated. I've seen that sometimes in the news, so.
Or not believed, I think, is the more common one. Where there's definitely research around women not being believed, and then people of color not having worse outcomes, especially maternal care. But yes, for sure, good point. Yeah. So Good analyses. Okay, so here's just a non-comprehensive list. I only have one slide on this, so this is not by no means the end all be all. So in the era of post-pandemic life, you both have obviously finished high school and also been going to university during the pandemic era. So living through initially what was a pandemic and then a triple-demic last year and this year, dealing with influenza A, influenza B, COVID, RSV, and how that contributes to system overcapacity, accessibility, both of you pointed out too. So what I've noticed since the pandemic is not only are the emergency room volumes far higher, people are a lot sicker, and it's just very hard to keep up with, which in turn is leading to healthcare system collapse. Not just here in Canada because of the pandemic, because of accessibility issues, and my colleagues in the UK are, with the NHS have their own concerns about doctor burnout and how the system is not sustainable, and then in the US with the privatized system, with the way that insurance controls accessibility and affordability. I think basically healthcare across the globe is in a crisis. So those three are related. Preventative care is something we alluded to in the last section about, well, how do we prevent the overburden on the system is, well, keeping people healthier and disease detection earlier. Monitoring is part of that. Rural and remote care is kind of my everyday existence. So getting better, quicker tests and better access to tests is kind of something I live on a daily basis. Antibiotic resistance, we're going to go through a case study in the next couple of slides. And then some emerging opportunities. Using sock puppeting for drug repositioning, we'll talk about a case study of that. We talked about the importance of taking patient autonomy and contextualization into decision making. We'll talk about technologies in the next slide. And then drug affordability, and how it interacts with individual patients and has a specific side effect profile. Okay, so emerging crises. So this set of slides has been building since 2021, since 2020 in fact. So one way to shift our thinking when we talk about challenges is looking at challenges as opportunities. So at the very beginning of the pandemic, people were making new types of masks. So this is an extreme example of a very heavily filtered, very heavily buffered mask from the outside environment that came out towards the beginning of the pandemic. And I think one of the success stories of the pandemic is how quickly we were able to repurpose some existing technology, mRNA-based vaccines, put them through preliminary trials, and then get them out to the masses so that we could start returning to day-to-day life and to start tailoring back on the lockdowns and on masking so that we were able to overcome the pandemic. There were certainly a lot of lessons to be learned. So then emergent crises in 2022 were variants, and then keeping up with the vaccines to be able to address specific variants, just like we have an annual flu shot that is tailored to the most prevalent flu strain that year. And then the other part of that was psychosocial. It was totally non-technological, but it was the resistance against masking and how there was a lot of backlash and it was made into a political issue. In 2023, as we alluded to, was the worst possible triple threat, the trifecta of having to deal with COVID, RSV, influenza, and again this year in fact. And then kind of updating the slide for 2024, an opportunity is better detection. So I've seen examples of these online as having rapid tests that look for not just COVID, but influenza A and B, as well as RSV, and letting people know when to stay home. So these are widely available in Europe. I would love to have them widely available here in Canada because so many of emergency medicine visits in the winter are simply cold and flu symptoms for which, unless you're immunocompromised, is to wait out the symptoms and just stay hydrated. So that's one example of an opportunity. And then the other crisis, which is an opportunity waiting to be fixed, is healthcare system collapse, is all of this overburdening of the system. Okay, so I promised you some case studies. Here is antibiotic resistance. So the 40s through 60s, that was the golden age of antibiotic and drug discovery. We discovered penicillins, we discovered the other drug subtypes like streptomycin, quinolones, but the bugs evolved with them. And so now we have more and more resistant strains, and what were considered big gun antibiotics when I was training are now broad spectrum and potent antibiotics, but there's a lot of resistance to those too, which is kind of scary. And so now even the strongest antibiotics also have bugs that are resistant to them, which can be quite scary, knowing that some of these are very contagious and virulent bugs. So one interesting case study is 2015. The first breakthrough in decades is teixobactin, a novel type of medication that previously we weren't able to, a new type of antibiotic that we previously weren't able to harvest. The problem being that some of these these antibiotic innovations come from bacteria and being able to harvest them. But previously we were growing bacteria on agar plates, on petri dishes. And in fact, 99% of bacteria won't grow on them. And so what this one lab did is they said, well, what if we just mimic the soil environment in which bacteria grow, and created an environment where they would just put like a kind of a porous membrane in the soil, allow a bacterial colony to form, and then they could transfer it over to the petri dish. And so in so doing, they discovered teixobactin, which is a novel bacteria that is lipid-based. It looks at the lipid receptors on microbes, so it's not protein-based. So the advantages, bacteria are not going to develop resistance to this. So there's a really cool article about how they developed this, and then how they thought differently and were able to eventually culture this bacteria from the American Society for Microbiology. I've included the link here as well as a little blurb. So that's another opportunity in the face of a growing challenge. And just to kind of underscore how much of a concern it is, the WHO put a statement that said, antibiotic resistance is happening right now, everywhere, and has the potential to affect anyone of any age in any country, and is a major threat to public health. So this is as applicable to our everyday drugs for sore throats and pneumonia, to increasingly resistant strains of gonorrhea for STIs. We call them super gonorrhea now, which sounds terrifying. So the pace of innovation needs to keep up with the rate of resistance. Okay, so I also promised you I would talk about a case study in sock puppeting or drug repositioning. So this is a cool collaboration from Stanford and Packard, the computing company, where they used computer modeling to look at the 3D configuration of both drugs as well as target cell receptors. And in doing so, they were able to create this kind of matching service where they could say, well, this drug looks like it would fit in this receptor. And so then they were able to repurpose drugs for disease states, for new disease states. So one example was using a blood pressure pill for a type of lung cancer, and then they were also able to use a heartburn medication, so a version of Zantac, to that was the one that was used for lung cancer, and then a migraine medication they were able to use for inflammatory bowel disease. So it's just taking technology as well as thinking differently and asking questions, and then looking for problems to solve. Okay. Speaking on the theme of personalization as well as emerging technologies, has anyone here ever had to wear a cast? Yeah? How was your experience in the cast?
Uncomfy.
Yeah, was it itchy, uncomfortable, tight, driving you crazy?
Yeah.
Was it summer when you had to wear it, or winter?
I think like fall.
Okay. Okay, so I know that my patients who had to wear a cast in the summer, it's too hot, it drives them crazy. And it's uncomfortable, and then if you get an uncomfy bump while it's setting, like you just have to deal with that bump, they're not fun. Or if you get it wet, you either have to get it replaced, or it just smells after 6 weeks if you don't get it changed out. So this one company said, well, what if we could make casts better by 3D scanning your arm or your limb or whatever's affected and developing a personalized mold for you, and then also having it be porous so it can breathe, and then making it dishwasher safe so that when you want to wash it, you just swap it out. So that was the first innovation. And then a Russian group said, well, what if we could also look at increasing the rate of bone healing by adding ultrasonic wave therapy for looking at to see if that increased the rate of bone healing. And in their initial studies, they did find a moderate increase in bone healing. So imagine you only had to wear your cast for 2.5 weeks instead of 6. I think most people would take that. Okay. So another example of personalization, here's an example out of Harvard Medical School, looking at making genome data applicable and usable. So right now with the Human Genome Project, there are just multitudes of data out there, but how do we make that usable? So this project looked at making one-page summaries that could be distributed to family doctors saying, well, your patient has this genetic variant, so this is what it means. It means they're more sensitive to a blood thinner, or it means they're more resistant to a blood thinner and are more likely to need a higher or lower dose to start. So that's taking information and making it clinically valuable. Okay. So here's another example, a bit of a defunct example now, but one of the earliest examples of artificial intelligence was Watson, pioneered by IBM, and at first when it was pioneered, it was hoped to have lots of promise for diagnostics and for medicine, and eventually the claim to fame for Watson was being a winning contestant in Jeopardy. But this is where knowing the pitfalls of technologies also comes in handy. Does anyone know what happened to Watson on Jeopardy? So the final Jeopardy question was, what is the capital city of Canada? And I know it. You all know the answer. Watson put Toronto, and so made a very, very easy to make error and disqualified themselves. So now imagine that we were asking Watson to make a life or death decision, saying this patient has a cardiac arrest, what drug do I give? And they gave me, something egregious like potassium chloride, which of course is used for euthanization, for example, for pets. That would be an example of an egregious error. So there's a lot of pitfalls with emerging technologies. Okay, so taking a non-innovative or non-high-tech solution, but using it to make medical practice better, is taking patient context and lifestyle into account. So this is, I think, out of Duke University, and basically they looked at psychosocial factors for heart attacks. And then they looked at, well, how does divorce, which is a stressful life event, impact the risk for heart attacks? And particularly in women, divorce is associated with a higher risk for having a heart attack. And they don't go down with remarriage. So then that's important to know that, hey, if this patient's going through a life stressor and they're in this demographic, they're female, maybe they should be screened a little bit more closely for cardiovascular disease risk factors. Okay. Continuing on this trend of lower tech innovative examples, this is probably one of my favorites. This is out of the BBC in 2015. What they did, they didn't use artificial intelligence, they used pigeon intelligence, and they trained pigeons to identify what is a normal breast cell tissue sample, pathology slide, versus what is a breast cancer positive pathology slide. And when the pigeons were right, they were rewarded with birdseed. And they found that a single pigeon could diagnose just as well as a trained pathologist. So the pigeons are coming for your job, Kim, I'm sorry. And then what was really interesting is when they flock sourced the answer, the rate of accuracy went up even more. So pigeon general intelligence, as opposed to ChatGPT, seemed to be a good diagnostic answer for breast cancer diagnosis. So sometimes innovation isn't using new technologies, it's looking at new ways of thinking of things. And then the interesting fact is that some birds, pigeons included, can see into parts of the electromagnetic spectrum that humans cannot. So then it also begs the question, well, is that part of their ability to diagnose just as well or better in some cases than a human? Okay, so then just to wrap up this section, let's talk about the emerging trends in medicine, okay? So how do we make healthcare better? We start with better detection, earlier on in the disease course. So taking an extreme example, pancreatic cancer has a very low 5-year survival rate. So part of that is our treatment needs to get better, but what if we could detect the first abnormal metastatic, or the first abnormal cancer cell, the second pancreatic cancer developed, and maybe we could start treatment at that point. We've talked about the burden of chronic disease management. We've talked a little bit about opportunities with 3D printing. We haven't yet talked about managing large data set. So the more sensors and the more monitoring we have, the more data sets we're generating. And being able to keep up with the computing power to manage those data sets, as well as look for trends and then pull those trends and then make them clinically applicable. So that example from Harvard Medical School was one example. So in the era of ChatGPT, knowing how to, using artificial general intelligence to help manage those large data sets and pull out relevant trends will become important. We haven't yet talked about smartphones and how those are changing healthcare. So there are physicians I know who regularly prescribe apps like MyFitnessPal to help patients track their caloric intake, their weight goals, their fitness goals, their daily activity to help manage their weight. That's just one example. Using geolocation, so looking at the metadata from a group of smartphones and then how that pertains to what population trends are in health is another example of how we can use smartphones for health management. Using principles of technology for innovation to make technologies faster, better, cheaper, smaller. So for example, glucose monitoring. For those who need, for insulin-dependent diabetics who need to monitor their glucose, the standard used to be pricking their finger multiple times a day if you're using short-acting insulin. And now in the past few years, we've seen continuous glucose monitors that are implantable, lightweight, smartphone-enabled, so they're not pricking themselves, they're smaller, they are becoming more accurate. So that kind of ties into other trends of nanomedicine, being able to use drug delivery vectors and targets that can use more targeted delivery down to the cellular level. And then we've talked about a little bit about artificial intelligence, machine learning, big data already. We're going to have an entire lecture dedicated to virtual reality and augmented reality in about 4 lectures time, or actually I believe in February. And then human enhancement. Remember, coming back to that initial definition from the World Health Organization, health is not merely the absence of disease, but the presence of spiritual, psychosocial, physical well-being. So then, on the flip side of that, what if we're healthy, but we want to make ourselves better? What if we want to have better eyesight? What if we want to have 20/10 eyesight? What if we want to have better memories? If you had the opportunity to have a surgery that gave you a photographic memory, would you take it? Yeah? I'm seeing at least one nod. So we want to come up on a case study for that. Okay, and then this slide's in here just talking about the challenges of losing access to our physical learning working spaces throughout the pandemic. And so another case study is how virtual reality has been able to address some of those gaps. So we'll talk more about this in the VR lecture, but this is an example of one of the diagnostic imaging suites that we developed at Luxonic to help radiologists read images remotely by creating the entire radiology workflow in the virtual reality setting. Okay, so coming to memory enhancement, here is a really interesting study from the New England Journal of Medicine. I believe it's from 2012. And basically, they accidentally created a eidetic memory or photographic memory in a patient who was undergoing deep brain stimulation for hyperalimentation or obesity. So they were overeating, they failed all of the therapies, they were supposed to have deep brain stimulation to help address this, but they were off by a couple millimeters, and as a result, the patient had a photographic memory. So in theory, that was just a one-off case study, but it is interesting that there are observations and studies around that already. Okay, so, but on the flip side, brain surgery is invasive and it's not without consequence. So Neuralink is the other enhancement that is in the news these days. This is the implant that can help enhance our memories, enhance our performance, and has proceeded to primate testing. However, what's come out is actually there was a lot of ethical violations in the primate studies. There were a lot of infections, a lot of pain with the primate subjects, and a lot of undesirable outcomes, including early death. So the link to the Wired story is there. This is just to hammer home, we need to also always be aware of the downsides and the pitfalls of emerging technologies. Okay, so in the last part of this lecture, we're going to talk about, okay, we've seen the problem spaces, we've seen emerging technologies. How do we get from here to there? How do we create the future of healthcare that we want to see? Okay, so 4 principles I like to teach when it comes to fostering innovation are people, mindset, environment, and experience. So starting with people, not sure where this is going. There we go. Oh. Okay, I think that's a link to my 2010 TEDx talk on fostering innovation. Oh yeah, there it is. So it's there for your viewing later. But basically, it talks about developing an innovation mindset. But to continue on. Okay, so the reason I asked you at the start of this class is to think of your own role within medical innovation, what you would like to contribute. Is you're not going to be the one who develops the hardware as well as the software, as well as does the prototype development and the testing and develops the clinical trials and then prescribes it for a patient. Like, no one person is going to do that. It takes a team, especially in medicine, but in any kind of innovation. The best ideas come from the cross collaboration and the fostering of ideas and building each other's ideas. And what we're going to do next class is actually have a workshop on generating ideas. So bring friends. It works best in groups of several people. So groups of 4 or larger. So if you want to bring friends to the class, if you want to bring your sister, she wants to do it again. If you want to bring your brother, the computer scientist, feel free to bring them. And we're going to talk about how we build on ideas. Okay, so basically the idea is you don't need to be the brain surgeon and a rocket scientist as well, but you need to exchange ideas, figure out how to communicate, speak the same language, and work towards a common goal. And then the other idea is looking at how we work in teams. So don't view your team, your role on a team, whether you're the team lead or a member of the team, as simply working in a silo. View your role as being the mortar between the bricks, right? That's where the strength in a brick wall comes from. It comes from the mortar that holds the bricks together, that builds those bridges. And if you're viewing your role as a team as to fill in gaps, as well as build connections with your other teammates, your teamwork and your end product are going to be a lot stronger. Okay, so then mindset. So the first thing I challenge you to do is question everything, okay? So as you go out of this classroom today, start questioning everything. How could this be better? How could winter driving in Edmonton be better? How could winter in Edmonton be better? How can the design of this building to prevent future flooding accidents be better, right? So the first question you ask, the 2-word question you ask is, what if? So how can this be better? How can I make this better in the context of my experiences and what my priorities are? So this is an example, a case study of an 18-year-old who did exactly that. This is Anya Bulgarian. She was volunteering in a hospital in Canada, and she looked at the refrigerator size of dialysis machines and the tens of thousands of dollars they cost, and how a patient would have to come to the hospital for dialysis or do home dialysis. And what if you are in an underdeveloped region? What if you're in a disaster situation? What if it's hard for you to come to the hospital or hard for the hospital to come to you? So she developed a suitcase-sized dialysis machine that was an order of magnitude cheaper and a lot more portable for patients to be able to have dialysis in more remote environments. Okay. So then the other question I want you to ask is, what if? What if this could be better, and what if I can make this better? So this is another TEDx talk I did more on the exploration front. It's called Discovering Exploration, but I talk specifically about the how we discover, how we come upon new innovations, and the power of asking what if. But I want to take you through a case study right now. So does anyone know who this gentleman is? So this is Ignaz Semmelweis, and in the 19th century, so he was a physician, and he, in the 19th century, made an observation that physicians would come straight from the morgue and then go to the bedside to deliver a baby for pregnant patients, and these women were dying of puerperal fever, and there was a lot of infection and a lot of mortality, and he came up with this crazy idea that he was lambasted for, that he was ostracized for, and he was very sad that he actually spent the rest of his days in an asylum being mocked for his crazy idea, which was, we should wash our hands. In the 19th century, his idea was that we should wash our hands because I think the infections are coming from us, the physicians, and we are the ones causing all this mortality. And this is now the standard of care. Hand washing practices got so good in the early part of the pandemic that even other incidental hospital infections like Clostridium difficile, which can be just a nightmare and cause terrible colitis and diarrhea for patients, were those incidental hospital infections dropped as well because we were more diligent with hand washing. And so what ended up happening to Dr. Semmelweis is, he said, when I look back at the past, I can only dispel the sadness which falls upon me by gazing into that happy future when the infection will be banished. The conviction that such a time must inevitably sooner or later arrive will cheer my dying hour. So he at least had hope that, even though he was dying inside an asylum and that no one believed him, that we would someday believe him about hand washing. And he simply asked that question, well, what if? What if we took on this innovation? Okay. So then the other mindset is learning to think disruptively and learning to anticipate technology trends. Okay? So the case study that we're going to go through, first of all, we're going to talk about thinking exponentially. Okay? So what does that mean? Let's go through the thought experiment of running on a treadmill. Okay? If you are on your treadmill and you're going forward in a linear sequence or at a arithmetic rate of advancement, you're going to increase your pace to 1 kilometer an hour, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, then 6. If you're increasing in a geometric or an exponential pace, then you're increasing at 1 kilometer per hour, then 2, then you're doubling, then 4, then 8, then 16, and then by the time you make your 5th advancement, you are going at 32 kilometers per hour, and you've probably flown off the treadmill and have hit the back wall because you can't keep up with the rate of change. Okay, so when we apply that to technology, let's look at communications technology. So when we look at how long it took the radio to reach 50 million people, what's your guess? How many months or years or days did it take for the radio to reach 50 million people?
I say 10,
10. Okay, 10 years? Okay. 15, okay. You are both wrong. It is 38 years, okay? All right, Facebook. How long did it take Facebook to reach 50 million people?
8 years.
8 years? 5? 2 years, okay? So now communication technologies are increasing more exponentially, okay? One of the recent Adele videos, how long did it take her Adele single to reach 50 million people?
3 weeks.
3 weeks? Couple weeks.
How many people?
50 million.
Like 5 days.
2 days. So that is the rate of exponential change because we're learning how to reach people, we're having technologies that are more ubiquitous, and then we're having people latch onto these trends, okay? So then how does this apply to trends and technologies in business? This was once upon a time the only way to get a book. We would go into a corner shop bookstore and we would buy our book. And then before long came the big box book chain stores, and there were Barnes and Noble and Chapters putting these little guys out of business. And then, not to be outdone, Amazon said, well, we'll do one better and we'll have an entire warehouse of books and you can have any single one you want, threatening the livelihood of the big box bookstores. And then what Amazon did to ensure that they weren't beat out by some other innovation is they were their own disruptive force. They said, well, what if people could just download any ebook anytime, because that would be the threat to physical books, and so they developed the Kindle. So the same thing has happened with movies and streaming. So once upon a time, again, I'm not sure how old you guys are, but back when I was a kid, my Friday nights were going to Rogers Video, Blockbuster Video, and we would go rent out a VHS tape. And then before long, Netflix said, well, what if we can make movies more accessible? So first they had a CD mail-in movie service, and you would rent your movie and then you would mail it back. And then with the rise of internet and internet capabilities, you could suddenly start streaming. And then for the longest time, so they disrupted the whole video and movie watching industry. But now, before long, there's multiple streaming services. There's HBO Max, there's Crave, there's Hulu, can't even keep up anymore, okay? So then the other way to think about what our lives are like today is going to the other extreme case of, well, what if we took away all of these technologies? And it's really interesting because we sometimes see these arguments of, early in the days of the internet, there were those proponents who said internet is a human right. And people would say, well, no, it's a luxury. And now even the WHO has said the internet access is a human right, which it is in this day and age because it's so critical to getting work and business done. But if we were to take a time machine and go to the 1970s, where there's no cell phones, there's no smartphones, there's no instant communication, it would kind of be like an extreme environment for all of us because the amount of social isolation that we would all feel would be extremely unusual for this day and age. So there's a family who actually did that a couple of years ago. They noticed that their toddlers were becoming so addicted to their iPads that it was just hard to get them to engage. So they said, you know what, that's it. We're going to live like it's 1986, the year in both which mom and dad were born. So that meant that if they were taking a cross-country car trip, there was no GPS. They were doing it with a map. That meant that they wouldn't use any gaming system beyond an Atari system. They could use microwaves, they could use fax machines, but there would be no email. If they had a new nephew or niece born, they would not look at the digital photos on a relative's phone. They would insist that it was developed by film and look at the hard copy only. So that's kind of the extreme example of taking away all of this cushioning that we have in our current society. Okay? So then, when it comes to projecting and developing the future we want to live in, let's talk about how quickly things are changing. So what are some jobs that didn't exist 10 years ago that exist now? Yeah. Uber, yeah, that's a great example. Yeah.
Social media manager.
Social media manager, yes. Any others?
Oh, now you can like instant order, like groceries or something.
Yeah, you self-checkout at the, yeah, so all of those things. So social media managers up there, cloud computing service provider. We didn't have cloud computing like 15 years ago. App developers. If you take a time machine and go back to 2005 and say, hey, can I hire you to be an app developer? Will anyone know what you mean? Big data miners, big data analysts, those are legitimate jobs now. Digital marketing managers, search engine optimization specialists, and my favorite, I still keep this in here even though it's dated now, the Zumba instructor. Because you could see in 2008 there were 16 Zumba instructors, and then in 2013 there were 6,300. I'm sure that's declined greatly now. Probably now replaced with hot yoga or something like that. Okay, so what are jobs that will not exist in 10 years now, that will become obsolete? You've kind of already spoken to some of them. So we talked about
in 10 years, did you say?
Yeah, so fast forward to 2030 and beyond, or even 2035. What jobs, are at threat?
This might be like maybe saying, I don't know if it's gonna happen too early, but I'm seeing a lot of work being done, especially with self-driving cars.
Yeah.
So even like Uber drivers, taxi drivers, truck drivers, like for delivery.
So if you were the CEO of Uber, what would you do to mitigate that?
Start like automated cars.
Start investing in automated. That's exactly what they're doing. Yes, exactly. So Uber is investing heavily in autonomous transport. Okay, so we talked about how self-checkout is replacing the retail cashier. Automated robots have replaced telemarketers, which is much better. We've talked about robots and drones for delivery. Has anyone seen a print newspaper recently? Not really, yeah. So this actually, so when I started teaching this course, print newspapers were still ubiquitous, and now it's nearly impossible to find a print newspaper. Travel agents have gone the way of Travelocity, Expedia, Kayak. Postal workers still exist, but drones are quickly catching up. We talked about the taxi driver and Uber and Lyft. When I started medicine, if I was doing a dictation, it would go to a transcriptionist. Now we have voice recognition technology and programs to help us dictate. Librarians are being, well, not yet, they haven't been phased out by online search, but they are in competition. So then, what is going to replace the social media manager, do we think?
Like stuff similar to how ChatGPT works.
Yeah, could be ChatGPT. Okay, so then what are jobs, continuing on this thought experiment, what are jobs that will exist in 10 years that don't exist yet? What jobs would you like to see? So here's one, Miriam, that based on your experiences, you were saying that how hard it was to learn to navigate the healthcare system in Canada. And I've seen this as a physician myself trying to help relatives try to navigate healthcare system is we need healthcare navigators. So that's high on my list. Waste data managers. So if I asked you, if I gave you a floppy disk from 1990 and said, hey, can you open my Word document? Would you know how to do that? No, so that's wasted data. So now fast forward to the year 2100 and I gave you a version of PowerPoint 2000. Or if I gave you were running your system on PowerPoint 2000 and I gave you a PowerPoint from today, do you think it would be compatible?
No.
Probably not. So learning what to do and how to preserve that waste. Virtual reality and augmented reality architects. So the interesting thing is, back when this list was first created, that was a future job, but really that's a job that exists now. We're seeing alternative currency bankers now, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Dogecoin, Marscoin, all the coins. Privacy managers. Interestingly enough, we haven't seen the rise of this, but we're seeing an entire generation of children who have no say in whether or not their lives are broadcasted to the world. That's true of whether it's just digital media, digital photos on Facebook, on social media, on Instagram, or it's the families who are broadcasting their lives on YouTube. So early on, this was a very more contested debate, but I still do think that we should be considering privacy as we go forward. As we increase life expectancy, we are seeing where there's increased capacity to be able to care for our elderly, to be able to keep them fit and healthy, to manage their chronic disease. So nonagenarian and probably centenarian service providers, I think, will be an increasing sector in the future. Memory augmentation specialists. So honestly, I would love to have an eidetic memory. And again, this list is now becoming the reality. So commercial second generation astronauts. You know, even in 2015, 2016, 2017, this was a thing of the future. As of 2021, this is now a reality. And then my favorite, extinction revivalists. So who here's seen Jurassic Park? Yeah. Oh, you haven't seen Jurassic Park? Your homework is to go watch Jurassic Park. But basically what they do is they take a mosquito encased in amber, they extract its DNA, finding dinosaur DNA, and then they create this entire park where they bring dinosaurs to life. What could go wrong? And there's a whole franchise about it. So that seemed like science fiction. However, this is a company that is trying to do exactly that with the woolly mammoth, to let the woolly mammoth, which has long been extinct, roam the Arctic to transform the ecosystem there. Okay, so I can't believe I have to ask this, but what could go wrong with bringing a woolly mammoth to life?
The biggest thing would be disease. So since we don't have like immunity to whatever bacteria existed back then, we're probably don't have like the correct resources to develop with it, so it could
Yeah.
result in
So they could bring disease, or we could give it disease. What else?
I feel like because it's been extinct for so long, the life that lives there has like, they moved on.
Yeah.
You know,
That's a really good way of putting it. Yeah, they're just going to disrupt the ecosystem. So it needs to be done in a very, very conscientious, very stepwise, very conservative manner. Okay. So here are my predictions, or here are some trends I'm seeing in medicine in 10 years. It's going to be more portable. I think if you were to see a patient in 2035, they would have lots of monitoring devices, but they would be so minute you wouldn't know that they would have them. There would be early detection the second they start getting trends towards more insulin resistance, for example, higher blood pressure. We might be integrating more immersive technologies for teaching, for training, for patient education. I don't know which way healthcare is going to go. Being a physician in healthcare today is a little bit scary. I don't know if we're going to go two-tiered and have less accessible medicine or more accessible medicine, and we're just going to completely revamp our system and keep it public. It will be more predictive. We'll have earlier disease detection and more targeted treatments. We will continue to struggle under the burden of chronic disease from dementia, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, stroke. We will need to both develop more preventative disease, but we just need to figure out how to manage the cost and the patient impact of chronic disease. There will be new positions for navigating the healthcare system. We will graduate from having subspecialties to subspecialties. So, you can go be a neurosurgeon, and then a pediatrics neurosurgeon, and then a vascular pediatric neurosurgeon, and then maybe a vascular pediatric neurosurgeon who specializes only in arteriovenous malformations. Like, that is very, very, very niche, but that as we do learn more about disease, we will need to specialize more. More personalized, we already talked about that. We'll see a lot more pseudoscience, and we've already seen this with the pandemic and how much hydroxychloroquine has been touted as a cure for COVID. It is not. We see that a lot with the supplement industry, which is totally unregulated, and how we see that these anti-aging supplements are promised to cure all your joint aches and stop your aging and make you more attractive to whoever you want to be attractive to. So that needs to be regulated. And then I think we're going to see more of a push towards personal enhancement. The X Prize Foundation, are you familiar with the X Prize? So we have a couple slides coming up on it. But Peter Diamandis is a very forward and future-oriented thinker, and he runs the X Prize Foundation, which funds moonshot prizes. And so the entire commercial space industry came from a challenge to successfully launch a spacecraft to space, and the prize was $10 million, which actually is just a fraction of the cost it was to develop and test a working spaceship. But he wanted to just kick off this industry. So his latest X Prize, actually launched in the past few months, is to be able to reverse aging by 10 years over a specific time frame, and I think it's a $100 million prize now. So if you could live longer, or if you could stop aging, would you? I think it also depends what age you're at, because I think depending if you're in your teens to 20s to early 30s, you probably are okay with aging, but I think if you ask the 40 to 50 to 60 crowd, they probably would take it. Okay, so the downside, the dark side of trends is we can't talk about medicine without talking about socioeconomics and psychosocial issues. So issues that were not a priority in 2010, climate crisis, pandemic planning, social distancing, social media well-being, cryptocurrency management, systemic racism, LGBT rights. Okay, so where are we now in 2024? Issues that were not a priority. So that is a little bit depressing, because we are kind of screaming into the wind here as the planet is burning. And we're having to battle misinformation. So not only do we have these issues which are under-addressed, we have new hurdles to surmount them. And so just to kind of give you a picture of where we are in terms of societal impacts, we have more refugees worldwide than we did for the first time since World War II. We have over 50 million refugees worldwide. More people are considered enslaved in the present day than at any time in human history. So that's close to the entire population of Canada, up to 30 million people. We haven't, there's a dearth in exploration. We haven't sent humans back to the moon since 1972, so in decades. There's a lot of exploration and knowledge about our planet. We've only mapped 5% of our oceans. We've mapped more of the moon's surface than we have of the oceans. Global warming, I won't belabor that point, but we're essentially watching our own kettle heat up and still debating whether the pot is heating up. And then we talked about systemic inequities with respect to gender equality, LGBTQ rights, systemic racism. So there are a lot of hurdles to overcome. Okay, so remember, the mindsets we want to think about is thinking about crises as opportunities. So what mindsets? We've already talked about some from my perspective. So I kind of talked to you about Peter Diamandis as a futurist. So he talks about abundance, longevity, exponential thinking, and moonshot thinking. So we talked about exponential thinking. Moonshot thinking is asking those big what-if questions. It's like creating a product roadmap for humanity of saying, if I were the boss of the world, what innovations, if I had $1 trillion, what would I invest my money in? What changes would I invest in making? Longevity, we talked about increasing the human lifespan and reversing aging. And then abundance. If we had no limitations on resources, what could we achieve? If fuel was not limited, if we had unlimited power, unlimited solar, electric power, unlimited fuel sources, what could we achieve? Okay. All right, I'm just going to do a time check here. Okay, we have about 5 minutes left, but we're almost at the end. So we're going to talk about environment now. What kind of environments foster innovation and creativity? So we've already talked about fostering collaboration. So environments that allow collaboration to happen help facilitate that process. Okay, so practicing innovation and making it easier for others. How do we do that? We're going to put that into practice next time. Okay, so engineering physical workspaces to foster those interactions. So here is an example of Pixar where famously you have to walk the length of the building to get to the bathroom, to get to the mailroom, to get to where you want to go. So then you're bumping into other departments. And there's famous stories about how when the animation department and the computer graphics department bumped into each other, that ideas for major motion pictures were born. Same thing with Google. They've famously engineered the open office work plan, so there's pros and cons. So there might be more disruption and more chatter through the workday, but there's also more chatter to foster that innovation. This is probably another video. This speaks down to environment. Also taking advantage of the environment that we live in 2024. So this is the best possible time to want to empower yourself to learn, to teach yourself. You can fund your projects through Kickstarter or CrowdSpring. You can teach yourself through massive online open courses. U of A has them, MIT has them, Coursera has them. There's new technologies at every step of the way. Arduino and Raspberry Pi boards allow us to code and to build and to engineer. And then we can also learn and also broadcast ourselves on these platforms that we have, for better or for worse. Okay, so we're going to talk about experience now. What kind of personality traits foster innovation? So this is a study from Harvard Business Review where they took notable leaders in business and said, compared to the general population, what personality traits are associated with them? So the top 5 were association, questioning, observing, experimenting, networking. Association. So they were building bridges between unlike ideas. So you take a computer scientist, you take a physician, you put them in a room, and they're building like, oh hey, how could we work together? Questioning, asking those what if questions. How can this be made better? How can I make this better? Observations. This seems to be inefficient. So making that observation that something could be made better in the first place. And then creating a plan to experiment. And then networking, building the team. So the other part of this is that you don't have to be of a certain age or certain background, that innovation can come from anywhere. IDEO, one of the world's leading design firms, they have a headquarters in Silicon Valley. They employed a 91-year-old designer from a nursing home because they wanted to know what the pain points were for the elderly living in nursing homes. And things that you and I wouldn't think about is having arthritic fingers that struggle with opening child safety locks on pill bottles. So she worked with them to create a prototype that was more friendly for the elderly, but also still safe and childproof. And then they sketched it out, they created a prototype, they validated it, they iterated, and they repeated the cycle. Okay, so question, observe, experiment is your takeaway from that section. Okay, so we're reaching the end of the section. So the principles of fostering innovation, people, mindset, environment, experience. We're going to put this into practice next time. Try to bring along at least one friend so we can have a lot more cross-collaboration. So this is a throwback to where we started. We talked about a future in which, as a child on your day off of school, you could put on your VR headset, shoot bad guys, and eradicate the tumor of a brain tumor patient. So the hypotheses that I want you to walk away with is this is the best time to be alive and empowered to innovate. There's a lot of challenges out there, but those are also opportunities waiting to be fixed. There's never been a better time to teach and create and learn. And there's potential in everything and anyone. So this is just for fun. Last year when I was teaching this course, I signed up to ChatGPT and I said, hey, I'm teaching this course on technology and the future of medicine. What top 10 topics should I hit? And good to see that we hit most of them. AI, machine learning, telemedicine, and telehealth. We didn't touch so much because I think it's already here. Personalized medicine, genomics, gene editing, CRISPR, nanotechnology, 3D printing, bioprinting, robotics, and automation in surgery. Again, I think that one's already here, so we don't need to talk about that. Blockchain in healthcare, augmented reality, virtual reality, Internet of Things, wearable devices. And then, as I've been saying, remember to discuss the ethical, legal, and social implications associated with their adoption. So everything I've just said in an hour, 20 minutes, ChatGPT said in 2 slides. So hopefully you learned about emerging trends and challenges in healthcare, why it matters, how we think differently about innovating, and then hopefully you'll reflect upon this throughout the course as to what role you want to play in all of this. Okay, my email address is not there. It's here, but it's super hidden. But it'll be if you have any questions, it's just my first name, last name at gmail.com, or just my last name at alberta.ca. Either way, I'll get it. And then if you want some optional homework, which no one's ever taken me up on, just some questions to think about how you go about your daily life after this lecture is, what kind of questions as you go about, strolling on campus, what kind of questions can you ask? Think about a sector that you personally want to have an impact on and develop the future that you want to see. Take a notepad and a pen and just take down your ideas about inefficiencies you notice around campus, around home, and then just sketch ideas. They don't have to be reasonable. They can be ridiculous. And think about how they can be made better. And then ask yourself, what are problems that didn't exist 10 years ago, problems that will exist in 10 years, and problems that no longer exist. So there you go. That has been a whirlwind to introduction to technology and the future of medicine. Any questions?
Yeah, I would just like to make a comment. You probably all subconsciously realize this, but the best art is sometimes self-referential art that refers to itself. And we are the only people who've used any of the teaching rooms in this part of this building, at least since noon and maybe in the whole day. So in a flood damaged building, we found the only usable room, and we used it for this lecture. So there.
Yeah, so we took the flood crisis and turned it into an opportunity. Excellent application.
Right. Yeah. So any other student?
How would 3D printing organs work?
Yeah, so you would inject a bio-ink, so that can be based on either a scaffold that you're trying to build cells around, and then seed it with the cells that you're trying to develop, or you could print the cells themselves around typically you build around a scaffold. So there's really cool examples. If you just Google 3D printing knee menisci in space, 3D printing heart cells, there's some really cool articles out there. Yeah. Other questions?
In the Middle East, there's a huge emergence of telehealth right now. It's a big thing. A lot of doctors are taking appointments online and everything. What do you see are the challenges, and I don't know how implemented it is here, but what would be the challenges in implementing it in Canada?
That's a great question. So it has become more ubiquitous over the past 20 years, and then it has risen exponentially in adoption in the pandemic because we had to. So then for a while we weren't allowed to, emergency rooms were open because they're for emergencies, but our clinics were closed during March 2020, but we could still take phone calls. So then the challenges there were administrative as well as clinical. So from the clinical side, diagnosing something without a physical exam is really hard, and you're kind of guessing at what kind of tests need to be done. And in one case scenario, a colleague had someone come in with a ruptured appendix because they were kind of waiting to be seen. So my principle now is I'm happy to do telephone consults where something doesn't require a new diagnosis or a physical exam, but if it's something like I've been on this medication for a year, happy to renew it over the phone, or I just need a blood work requisition, things that don't need a physical interaction. So as we're able to overcome that hurdle, that will make virtual and telehealth better. And then the administrative hurdle was the importance of implementing virtual care when we had no physical care wasn't really underscored. So it took a long time for this, for the code that doctors use to be able to get paid for their time. And then no matter whether you spent 10 minutes or 2 hours with a patient, you would be paid the same amount. So then a lot of doctors were just really discouraged from using it, from adopting it. So that's an example of how administrative hurdles discourage the adoption of a really promising technology. But on the other hand, like we are using telehealth for having ultrasound technicians gather images and then radiologists read them remotely without having to go to a distant community. Dermatologists can look at, with good enough resolution monitors, can examine skin afflictions and diagnose them. So it's a double-edged sword. Perfect, great. You guys are welcome to stay as long as you want, but I know we're at time, so either way, you guys are free to go. We'll see you Thursday.
Thank you. Yeah.